Are you looking for an escape from manufactured truth wrapped in selfish agenda? Don't you just want to have a real and raw conversation, all masks and rules aside? That's what you're getting here at Titan Evolution Podcast. Get rid of all the nonsense information and discuss everything under the sun without filters. Listen to real stories of real people who will put your current perspectives to the test, guide you on living the life you truly want, and see everything free from judgment and pretenses. Time to get rid of those unhealthy environments and let your authentic self shine. Here are your hosts, Travis Johnson and Carol Carpenter.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Travis Johnson, here with my fabulous co-host, Carol Carpenter. Hello, Carol. We have a special guest today is Robert Robinson. That's a lot of Robs. Rob is retired.
Department of Redundancy Department.
Rob is a retired infantry officer. He's got a couple of podcasts, As for Football, focusing on Army football, college football. How the heck are you, Rob?
I am well. Still recovering from the hurricane this weekend, of course, because my backyard is right in the path of the wind flow in my neighborhood. So I have about 4 panels on my fence that I got fixed. But again, Lowe's delivers, so it makes it a little bit easier. So I don't have to go run around the hardware store. But yeah, glad to be here. And hopefully I can share something of interest to you and your audience. But here it is. Let's do it.
Well, I guess we're going to find out, huh?
Yeah.
Audience, let us know. Send us a message on social media. Let us know if Rob delivered or if Rob sucked. That's what we
no pressure. No pressure at all.
No pressure. No pressure. Rob, I gotta know, man. What makes you a Titan?
So what makes me a Titan is I'm kind of like a great white shark. If shark stops swimming, it dies. And so that's basically how I am right now. It started, many, many moons ago when I was a young kid growing up around the military. One of the hardest things that I did have to realize is when I finally ended my service, I ended 47 years of being in or associated with the uniform. So my dad was in the Army for 27 years, grew up as a sergeant major's kid, bounced all over the country, got to see a lot of different places and a lot of different things. And then it was like, hey, I can do that. So always trying to one up the old man. I went to college, for 4 years, graduated, and then commissioned as an infantry officer, did 23 years in the infantry, did 5 deployments operationally in Iraq and Afghanistan, got shot at in both countries, and survived. I have all my fingers and toes. I wouldn't say that makes me a Titan, but that makes me at least a survivor. And so, I have some experiences that I can share with people. And the other part of it is, and I tell people this all the time, look, if you meet another veteran, what's important to you may not be the same thing that's important to them, but as part of your services, being in the military, make sure you have the most badass shadow box that you can, because it's only going to matter to other veterans. But if you have a badass shadow box, people are going to be like, okay, that guy probably did some things. And so ultimately, that's what I tell all the young guys that I run into these days. It's like, look, don't worry about picking and choosing the jobs that the Army would tell you to choose. Pick and choose the jobs that are going to build you the most badass shadow box ever. So then when you're retired and you're old, you have something to look at, when you're in your wheelchair and your body is failing you.
That's hilarious, because I retired 7 months ago and I don't have a shadow box built. So it sounds like it's on my to-do list.
Yeah. Get after that.
Thank you both for your service. Appreciate it. It is because of guys like you that we have the freedom and we get to enjoy all the privileges we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, but I would also say, what? It is what it is. Like I said, I came from a family of service. My grandfather served. He was an engineer in World War II. My dad joined the Army in the 70s, and then I followed suit. So it's kind of a family tradition. So for some people, it was a legacy of service to the nation, which is kind of what happened. Not everybody is like that. And, there was a period of time before, 9/11 where most people didn't know anyone that served, or maybe had a cousin or a distant relative that was in the military. And then 2 towers go down, and then everybody's serving because of the call to action that basically the whole country received. And so by having that, it changed the dynamic. But fast forward to today in 2022, there are kids that grew up after 9/11 that have no idea that it happened.
Yeah.
And that's a scathing indictment on us as leaders for not passing that on to the next generation. But it's also, the current state of play. We only care about what's current because that's the only thing that I can sell. You know, I can't sell history. I can sell, you know, grievance. And so that's what we do.
Yeah. It's kind of sad. That's what it's come to. And that you can't have children that learn from our mistakes if we don't discuss our mistakes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a true statement. And you see it everywhere. You know, you see it everywhere. And so like one of the things that was difficult for me was, you know, deciding where I wanted to go to college. I was you know, as a high school athlete playing football, I was undersized. You know, I'm not the biggest dude in the world. I look bigger in pictures, I guess. That's what everybody says. Like, oh, I thought you were taller. Well, you know what? F you. But,
I thought you were more polite, you know, like,
yeah, right. But, you know, deciding what I wanted to do. And nowadays, kids don't have to worry about making that decision. Like, do I want to go to college? Do I not want to go to college? You know, what is there out there for me? It's like, oh, try everything, because we'll just continue to pander to you until you reach success. Like, no, like the real world doesn't work that way. It's dollars and cents. You know, hey, if I don't bring anything of value to the table, guess what? I'm not getting any money. Like, if you don't work, you don't eat. And that's something that has been lost by lots of generations, you know, and it's typical in the Army. We talk shit about the guys behind us, like, oh, those guys fucking suck, you know, because like, oh, they didn't have it as hard as we did, you know, and that's everybody says that. Right. It's generational, but there's also some truth to that. Right. So if you go back and you look at the military that my dad served in, coming out of Vietnam, there's a lot of alcohol and drugs. They kicked all those guys out. We had an all volunteer force. And, you know, today's the 4th of October. So if you guys don't remember, yesterday was Black Hawk Down Day. For those of you guys don't remember, it was freaking 30 years ago that, you know, Rangers went into Somalia. And like, I watch Black Hawk Down every year to remind myself of that situation, because I can remember in college picking up a newspaper and seeing a kid with a, you know, a head wrap on and some size 17 Nikes that were way too damn big for his feet, toting AK, shooting at Americans. And that was the formative years of my life, and going, okay, like, look, Black Hawk Down was not a movie for me. It actually was an experience that I have a fond memory of. And I think that's part of it, you know, is figuring out what you want to do. So kids these days, and I say kids these days, but that's probably true. I'm old enough to be some of them's dad, which is effing scary too, but they can't decide what they want to do, you know, because everybody has received a trophy. So I don't have to work for anything. And then you have parents, that, like, we used to have helicopter parents that would just hover over their kids. Now they're lawnmower parents. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to plow the road so my kid has it easy. And nothing in life that's worth having is easy. And you guys can speak to that too. You know, like, even if it's something as building a brand or, you know, starting your own team or starting your own business or whatever it is, if you're not putting the effort in to make it happen for yourself, then it's not worth it. It's not as exciting as it should be.
The sad part is they're not used to hearing no either, you know, because of the fact that, oh, try everything. So the first no they get, they automatically think, oh, I failed, and just walk away. And there's hardships to be had. There's lessons to be learned from that, you know? Okay, so I got a no. Well, was my delivery good? No. Was I unclear, you know, about my message? I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. So you have to reframe it and go, okay, I got a no. Why did I get a no, right? And then try to get a yes, because it's in learning during that adversity that you become and transform to the person you want to be. So you can consistently keep getting no's and keep changing, but you're not learning in the process. You just keep getting trodden down to the point that you just don't want to continue. And that's the difference between, I believe, what you said, you know, your reasoning of being a Titan is surviving, getting through those hardships. And that's what, you know, best definition for you is survival. Yeah. That's what it's Titan, one foot after another.
And it's always too easy to fall into the grievance culture, you know, and that's what we promote these days. Right. And, you know, we talked about this before we got online, but I'll talk about it because this is kind of part of my story of who I am. So when I was a cadet at West Point, before I was a cadet at West Point, the dude that came to recruit me, Black military officer, goes, hey man, like, when you get to school, you need to pick a branch that's going to teach you a trade. Like, what do you mean a trade? Like, you need to be a commo guy or quartermaster or somebody that has a trade, because there's no way that you'll be successful as an infantry officer. Well, 23 years later, I retired as a lieutenant colonel I wouldn't say that was the pinnacle of a mediocre career, but I think I did okay, and the reason why that happened was because I chose the harder path. So the 800 or some odd folks that I graduated with, I think we only had 4 or 5 Black infantry officers that commissioned into the infantry branch. And I was the only one that did a full career. Mm-hmm. And did it have an impact? I don't know. There were times where it's like, man, I don't know if that was the right decision, but there are also times where, like, literally I'm running down the street in Mosul, Iraq in 2003. I have 172 people around me that want to kill the bad guys as bad as I do. And it's like, holy shit, man. Like, I am in one of the most powerful and empowered positions I have ever been. And that rarely happens for human beings. Like, hey, look, there's bad guys shooting at us. Blow that building up. And there was no like hesitation or thought process of it. Like, take those guys out. And it happened. And you're like, holy shit, like that's a crazy, scary feeling to have at 26 or 27 years old. And like, yeah, and that's the truth, and so why would you not continue to pursue opportunities like that? And that to me is what makes people interesting. Like, hey, what's your backstory? Like, hey, you may not be good at, all the things that I'm good at. That's okay, because everybody plays their role. And I think that's one of the things that we all struggle with as humans in general is, what's our identity and where do we fit in with the rest of this, big blue world that we're kind of living in.
It's interesting when you're in charge of a team and your life is actually threatened, the different level that you have to play at just to make it through, let alone any of the other stuff that's going on. You have to be so focused. People have to know their role. The Rock would be so proud. You got to know your role, shut your hole, and
right,
get it done.
Exactly.
Like there's no room. They talk about orders in the military, and I was in aviation largely, and there's wiggle room, there's room for error, there's room for second guessing, there's room for discussion most of the time. Critical phases of flight, right on, takeoff or landing, not a lot of time for discussion. But when you're in country, when you're through the buildings, through the alleys, there's no, hey, do you think that's a good idea? Get shot, you're dead, you're done, you're out of the game.
Yeah. And that's really like the big part of my story. And I hate the month of August, and I talk about it on some of my other stuff that I've done, but the month of August is always bad for me. So like when I'm in the month of August, anywhere in, CONUS, it's like, it's kind of a really, really relaxed feeling because like, I know I'm not going to get shot at. Well, unless I'm in like Chicago or DC or someplace like that. But for the most part, like most of the really heavy lifts in combat for me were in August. So in 2003 and 2004, big, huge firefight, 18 and a half hours outside of the wire, running gun battle, dudes trying to kill me trying to kill them, my guys trying to kill them, all trying to survive. And one of the things that came from that is, there are times and moments in your life where you're going to contemplate your mortality. And when it happens, it's always weird. So like we get back after this firefight, I'm literally covered in blood, sweat, smell like cordite, got 2 guys in the hospital, get back inside the wire, talk to the boss. Boss is like, hey, you need to go get some sleep. I can't, sir. I got dudes in the hospital. So I go over and check on my guys that, got shot in the engagement, come back the next day or the next about 30 minutes later, we're sitting down and I can't sleep. Of course I can't sleep. I've been shot at for 18 hours. I wake up, look outside, and basically every light in the house was on. So every last one of my soldiers that were involved in that firefight were just sitting there contemplating their reality. It's like, dude, we just were in a running gun battle for 18 hours. The scary part about it is you won't hear about it because nobody died. Right. And that's the part that we don't talk about, particularly when you look at soldiers. Like part of the invisible woundedness that soldiers have and post-traumatic stress and everything else that's part of the problem is people have been through some shit, but it's not televised and it's not live and it's not on the ticker on CNN or Fox News or whatever. So there's damage there and people just don't know, and for many years, the Army, and probably today you could still argue that the military is still not good at this because if you look at the veteran suicide rate, but when that firefight was over, what did we get the next day? I got a female sergeant and a specialist that were school trained psychologists to come talk to my dudes. It's like, you got 170 stone effing killers that have been in a firefight for 18 hours. The last thing I want to do is sit in a room and talk to this person. And Doesn't matter your qualifications. I just don't want to talk to you, because you're not the right fit. You're not part of my tribe. You're not part of my team. And that's one of the things that I've always tried to do as a leader, regardless of where I go, is, bloom where planted, but also build your tribe. So you have to have people around you that you trust, people that, are willing to go to the mat for you, and you're willing to go to the mat for them. And if you're not willing to do that and you're not in that environment, you need to change. Sucky part about the military is sometimes you can't change your tribe. So then you really have to bloom where planted, and then you have to train those folks to be better than they are in that moment. And so, it's always been that way, and then again, I had this one super sucks because, the next August, that was a bad day for me, was in 2007 or 2008. And Sergeant First Class David Todd got killed. Dude was the strong, silent type, super, super awesome guy. If you needed anything, like, he was like Hercules that didn't talk. So like, he's just this big muscle bound tanker guy. We got into a firefight. We assaulted this compound with a bunch of Taliban dudes on it. It was like, we had a battalion plus with us, and somehow only 13 of us roughly ended up on the objective. So we're like, hey, where'd everybody go? So we're in the belly of the beast, 2-way shooting match. We come out, Sergeant Todd and like maybe 6 or 8 other people were the only people to come out outside of the wire to support us. There's 400 people on the fob. Now, I am not going to call those guys that were inside the fob cowards, because half of them were international dudes and they had regulations. And if you've ever deployed, you guys know for a fact that there's a stack of national caveats. It's as big as a phone book that prevent our sister nations from doing anything. Right. Yeah. It's like, man, these guys got tanks, they got helicopters, like, where the F? And part of it is like, they just can't, because their country, like, they will go to prison for the rest of their lives. It's not like the United States. If you make an audacious choice, like, yeah, you might get yelled at or smacked around a little bit afterwards, but you're not going to lose your life or your livelihood.
Right.
And so, huge difference. But
before we get too far in, you use some military jargon that I'm familiar with, but Carol's like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
So for those of our audience and Carol that don't know, what is FOB? What is outside the wire? What do you mean by international guys?
Okay. All right. So FOB, forward operating base. That's basically, the place where you kind of hang out. You've got your big bases, and then your forward operating bases are just smaller places where guys will operate out of. Outside of the wire means you've got the inside of the wire, which is where all the people are, and outside of the wire where the people are not, usually, unless you're on a patrol or whatever. So when you go out on a patrol, that's what happens. And the whole scenario stunk from the very beginning. And it's a very, very funny story. I don't tell it as good as some of the guys that were with me. I had a 6-foot kid named Salvatore Galgano with me. And Galgano is like the biggest goofy kid in the world. You should probably get him on the show because he's funny as hell. And he tells way better stories than me. But we go outside the wire, things pop off. We're in this firefight and we're like, okay, well, what are we going to do? Well, these guys are on the far side of this cornfield. So if you've ever seen Platoon, we actually did a skirmish line, Vietnam style, walked across this platoon and assaulted this compound. And somewhere in all of this 4.5-hour firefight, we took an Iranian detainee, killed about 35 people, and walked out with 2 casualties, 1 Afghan, 1 American. Either way, it sucks because loss of life is loss of life. And, I heard somebody say this the other day, and it was kind of like, it's kind of tragic to hear somebody say that, particularly a young person, but they're like, oh, it's trauma bonding. So you guys are friends for the rest of your life because of that traumatic situation. And you're like, that's kind of messed up, but it's true, but yeah. I hate to hear a person under the age of 30 say something like that, because it's like, wow, you have a super bleak outlook on life if you're thinking trauma bonding at 22 years old.
Well, I think they're understanding that, right? So like the reason that you didn't want to talk to the college educated psychiatrist is because you don't have that trauma bond. You don't have that commonality. Like, they in their head understand what's happening, but them in their heart, they've never experienced it. So that gap, even though it's not that far away, is big enough to miss most of our service members, first responders, 911 operators, because they have not been in it. Yeah. They miss what they really need to connect with.
Do they not have psychiatrists in the military?
They do, but again, it's hit or miss on who you get. Some guys are more school trained. Some guys are like a dude that used to be a combat arms guy that went to school that could do it. Like, I had the best chaplain in the world. I'm gonna name drop him because Derek Gooding is the man. If you're ever in Louisiana, go to his church because he's standing up a church in retirement. But like I always kept a chaplain with me at all times because I'm a fucking shit show. And so I need the spiritual guidance. And so by having the chaplain with me all the time, like you get to know those guys. And that Derek Gooden was the best chaplain. You know, I can't say the best chaplain because I've always had good ones, but one of my better chaplains was Derek. And this guy was a former Marine. So when he showed up, it wasn't like, oh God, here comes the chaplain. It was like, oh, hey, here comes the chaplain, you know, and it's that different introduction to the soldiers that makes the difference. And like being on objectives in 2003 with him, he's like, hey sir, like I got this hooligan tool. And you're like, you okay with like popping locks and breaking in stuff? And he's like, sir, there's nothing about me being able to do stuff like that. I'm like, all right, if you're cool with it, I'm cool with it, you know. But it made him part of the team. So again, he became part of the tribe. And so when there was a need or there was an issue, the soldiers weren't afraid to approach him. And I think that's, you know, for me, that's one of it. And we talk about it all the time. And we say this, and it's cliche, and you hear it a billion times over. You got to survive the peace, right? As a soldier, that is it. So like, if you can't find your tribe inside the military because you're out, you know, you're medically discharged, you've retired or whatever, then you have to build your tribe outside. And whether that be, you know, jujitsu, fishing, guns, whatever, you know, whatever hobby floats your boat, go do that aggressively once you get out, because so many people fail to kind of find that connection afterwards and they struggle. And it's not to say that like Rob's got it all together. Like I said, like what makes me a Titan is surviving. So I've survived a whole bunch of other shit that I've gotten through, you know, but even counselors need counseling. So like, if you don't get help when you need it, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I love that you talked about the chaplain that had prior experience. One of my biggest tools that I had was that I did 11 years enlisted before getting commissioned. So I wasn't just the, you know, the hot shot in a flight suit, like, oh, he's fresh, he's going to know stuff. Like, I know how it works. And I knew a lot of the guys from when I was enlisted. So like for me to get integrated into that scene was super easy. So I had the enlisted guys coming and telling me all sorts of stuff because I knew exactly what they were going through, how to handle it, how to help them navigate that stuff, as were the other officers, you know, straight out of getting commissioned with that prior experience. You know, they might know some of that stuff, but really they know up here, but not, you know, they don't know in here.
Yeah.
So they may
they may intuitively know it, but they don't have the application of it. You know, and that absolutely. And that matters so much, you know, like look, if you ask me like jiu-jitsu, yeah, I can talk to you about that. Army stuff, I can talk to you about that. You know, if you ask me to like, you know, rebuild an engine, all right, we'll be at YouTube and probably in the garage for like the next 3 years because Rob's just not going to be able to do that without a little bit of assistance. And I'm not, but the other part of it is I'm not going to bullshit you and tell you that I can't.
Right.
You know,
right.
And
exactly.
Right.
That's, you know, and that's one of the biggest problems with people that I see both in business and, you know, the military. It is what it is. Like somebody's disingenuous when in the Army, you just fucking ignore them. Like, look, that guy sucks. I'm not going to deal with him. You know, that makes it easy in the military.
Fake it till you make it attitude, right? And it's like, oh, please, everybody knows you're faking it, dude.
Yeah, but you can
anymore.
Yeah, people can smell it a mile away. You know, disingenuous people, like everybody's like, oh, don't hang out with that guy. Like, why? Because he sucks. And if other people are telling you that, like, okay, well, maybe my intuition was correct. But I've seen it both in business too. So I've dealt with small business people a lot in the last 2 years in retirement. And one of the things that dealing with those folks is it's like, look, man, know where you're good at, know what you're good at. And for God's sakes, have a good story, man. Like I used to work for a guy, and I won't say his name because he's pretty prominent in the research and development community in the Department of Defense. But the dude was a C-17 pilot in the Air Force. And he's like, I don't understand why Army guys don't like me. And the C-17 is a big ass cargo plane, right? So if you've ever seen a big ass cargo plane in the Army and you're an infantry dude, you're either jumping out of it or you're flying someplace undesirable. So at the end of the day, that guy's a fucking bus driver. And so you're like, look, dude, I don't want the bus driver telling me shit about, you know, how to grow your business. Like it just doesn't work that way. So find a better pitch. You know, and this is one of those things, like from a developmental standpoint, is like, how do you convince people that you're worth their time? You know what I mean? And I think that's something that some people have it, Some people have the gift of gab. Some people are charismatic. Like, there's a reason why everybody's like, oh, Dwayne Johnson should run for president because dude's super charismatic guy, right?
Yeah.
But do you think he has the chops to run a fucking government? I doubt it. He may be able to run a business pretty well, but I'm sure he's got a laundry list of folks that help support him as well.
Look at Ronald Reagan, right? He became the president and he was an actor, and everybody was like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Maybe that's the reason people brought up, well, Dwayne Johnson. I mean, very charismatic. He reminds me of a gigantic teddy bear, right? Because he's this big, strong dude, but he's like all soft and mushy inside. So you're just like, oh, like, yeah, maybe he would be a great thing, but could he run a nation?
Who knows? Right? Well, it goes back to simple point, man. One of the greatest quotes ever. And people, are mixed about this dude's political stance. Aaron Sorkin wrote a show in the 90s called Sports Night. If you've never watched it, you absolutely have to. And the reason why you have to have it is because it's a third-rate television show that's trying to stay on top against Fox Sports and ESPN. So their work is already cut out for them. But one of the things that the boss said, and it was Robert Guillaume, and Robert Guillaume says this to him. He's like, look, if you're smart, surround yourself with smarter people that disagree with you. And if you're not smart, surround yourself with smart people that can do your job for you. But either way, guess what? You're surrounding yourself with smart people. And I think too many people these days want their ego stroked rather than their ego checked. Right. Yep. And so having somebody that was like, I don't think that's going to work, and deep down inside, like, you probably know that it doesn't, but you don't want to have that little poke
conversation
at your ego.
That's the challenge. You're being challenged to grow, and if you need your ego stroked that badly, I mean, shit, you're not going to grow.
I love feedback, but never initially. Like, you're like, Travis, you suck at this. I'm like, no, I don't. And I'll stomp around for like 20 minutes, and then like I'll cool down and be like, yeah, I needed that. But like initially, I'm like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a bad person. You're a meanie. And then, by the end of the day, I'd be like, hey, man, that was a good talk. I really appreciate that. I needed that.
Yeah.
You need to have your temper tantrum first. Is that
yes,
right?
I throw a little mini tantrum like I've never had feedback before. And then the older I get, the shorter the tantrum is. Because I know I need it. I'm just not ready to hear it right away. But I always come back. I always come back around and be like, yeah, about that. You're right.
And I think it's just, it's wisdom, right? It's book smart. Again, it's head smarts versus heart smarts. That's, to use Travis's description. It's like, hey, look, I have all this stuff in my head. Like, I can sit down and read books all day, and I can be the smartest person in the world when it comes to a particular topic. However, the application of that particular topic may be completely different, because I can study all day long on how to be a welder. I'm probably not going to be any good at it until I do it for 10 or 15 or 20 years. Right.
It's practice.
And so I think there's a huge part of our society that just doesn't want to do the work. And like, if you're, truly, since we're talking about titans and wanting to be one, like, if you want to be a titan of whatever industry that it is, be a master of your craft. Right. Yeah. Whatever that is. I don't care what it is. Like, if it's podcasting, be a damn good podcaster. So like, if your audio sucks, figure out how to edit it. If you, do video presentations, figure out how to do all the drop-ins and make your shit look really, really cool. So it's compelling to the eye, and there's science behind it. Right. So study the science of attracting people's eye to what you're trying to get them to look at. And so
that's why I got Carol on the show as my co-host. I needed someone to attract the eye.
Oh,
there you
look
go.
At you
look at that.
Complimenting me again.
Yes,
you want good. Something from me, I'm sure.
Yeah, we need to talk after. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
I'm in trouble.
to Rob's point, the reason, like, in the professional setting, not talking about business, but there's a reason doctors, lawyers, dentists, engineers, and accountants get paid so much. Is because of the endless study and application and mastering their craft. There's a reason why those have degrees required. There's a reason why they get paid so much. Business, of course, can crush them if you do well in business, but it's the research and the application and the constant tweaking and refining and all of those things that make that skill so valuable. So if you're listening to this and you're not getting paid what you prefer, chances are you need to put in more study hours and more application hours to make that thing worth something more than you're currently getting paid.
Well, you need to add the value, right?
Yeah.
So you got to do whatever it takes to be valuable enough for them to want to pay you more. If you
Mhm.
become invaluable to your company, if you're an employee, you don't think they'll pay you top dollar to be there? Fucking hell, they
Absolutely.
will,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not based on a degree. There's a guy right now, I wish I could remember his name. He's a senior VP at Dell Computers, right? He has one skill. He's not there to talk to people, he's not there to run the show. He can do anything and everything using Excel and building algorithms. So
Oh,
as they're
wow.
in the board, he's back in the corner with his little laptop sitting here listening to them describe the problem. And he gets paid because they'll come out through this, like, how much do we need to develop this thing? And they're like, yeah, 1.2, $2.2 million. He's like, well, I just wrote an algorithm that solves your problem for it. Do you want to just use this, or do you want to spend the 2 million? And
That's
he'll sit there
awesome.
and write it just sitting there. And he's got the one skill and he crushes it. Like,
Yep.
what else do you need?
And
Yeah.
guess what? He can probably write his paycheck, right?
He does write his paycheck.
Exactly.
He does write
That's
his paycheck.
cool. You know, but I think most of us don't like to be challenged. We want to believe that, hey, we're at the pinnacle. You know, hey, nobody can tell us that I can do this better. But everybody that has some advice, even if it's unwarranted, if you just listen close enough, there
Mhm.
could be some truth to it. And you could do some tweaking to be better, no matter what.
Yep.
We can
Yep.
always be better. I mean, we always say we're striving for perfection. Let's be honest, there is no such thing as perfection. However, it doesn't mean that we can't aim for it.
Mhm.
And I think that's all valid points, right? Is in creating an environment that is mutually beneficial. And I think that's one of the things that people forget, right? So it's like, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to plow in, I'm going to be the most invaluable person in my organization. Cool. But guess what? If you're not bringing people up, so again, and this goes back to the mentorship piece, right? So I can say that with no reservation that, like, I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't have those people around me that were like, hey, look, come talk to me about this.
Yeah.
You know, create that environment where I had that two-way dialogue. And so, like, if I was talking Korean out on the side of my neck, I could have somebody be like, no, man, like, you're screwing this up. Like, go sit down, reevaluate what you're thinking, and then come back and talk to me. And that's one of the things that I felt that was kind of lost in the military for many, many years. And I don't know if you could speak to this either, Travis, but like, there wasn't really like a lot of good mentors that would be like, hey, man, I'm gonna pull you aside and let's literally talk about your 5-year plan, and like honestly talk about your 5-year plan. Not, okay, I see you, you're gonna make lieutenant, you're gonna make captain, and then what's your plan as a captain? It's like, no, like, what's your plan if you don't get a company command? Or what's your plan if this doesn't work out? Are you going to try and do something else? Are you going to separate it 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Or are you going to try and do something new? Or are you going to stick with this to see if it's, the right fit for you for a couple more years? And we don't have those honest conversations because, success in the military has been a path that's been carved and rewalked 1,000 times.
Yep.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's right for Rob or Travis or Carol or anybody else that may be listening to this show. And that's the same for in the corporate environment as well, too, right? So I'm going to come in and work entry level. I'm going to be in the mail room, or I'm going to be, the standard cubicle clerk. And then I'm going to move up to this regional manager position. And then I'm going to move up to this position. And then, by 2025, and I'm 48 years old, I will be, the CFO of this company. Well, that briefs well, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. And so having somebody, again, to go back to the previous discussion about, having somebody give you feedback, honest feedback is the most hard thing to do. And sometimes the first step of that honest feedback is, hey, I'm jacked up. So I have to stop and seek that outside person to prevent me from being screwed up. And, sometimes that comes in the form of, the significant other going, hey, dummy, like, we have not sat down. We have not sat down and had dinner as a couple in a month. Like, oh shit, like, I probably need to schedule a date night. And that's something simple, right? Is maintaining relationships, whether that be internal inside the home or external outside of the home. Like, hey, I need to call this person that, has always given me solid advice. Or, hey, you know what? I haven't talked to that dude in 3 or 4 months. hey man, how are you doing? Right.
Yep.
And those are the things that we can all do, and it costs you nothing. And I was talking to a guy yesterday about he's starting his own consulting business. I said, look, if you're serious about starting a consulting business, you need to do 1 to 3 contacts a week on LinkedIn. And I say this and like completely unvarnished. This is just Rob's opinion. You could throw it out with the freaking toilet paper if you want. But my opinion is, if you're trying to develop, your network and keep your network current and fresh, particularly for military people, because like your flash to bang on how good your network is about 2 years, unless like you're a go-getter. Like if you're a dud, you're done in 18 months. Like nobody's going to call you back or answer your calls.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, because you talked about like mentorship and those things. Like I had a couple of guys in the military that really helped guide me. They pulled me aside when I was out of line, which I definitely needed, especially when I was younger. I really didn't have those mentors growing up. I had some other ones, but then when I got back from Bahrain, and Bahrain was big for me. Bahrain's where I learned how to do podcasting, when I was reading a lot of business books and doing a lot of things. When I got back there, I was really focused on my transition and making sure I had at that point probably 18 months or so left, and I had been really building the things I needed to build for transition. When I got back, and I had been mentoring people my whole career, but I really was like, if the Navy's done with you tomorrow, what's your plan? And they were like,
yep.
What skills do you need? Is it a degree? Is it a skill? Is that a whatever? What do you want your ideal day to look like? Who do you need to know in your network? What people do you need to meet that are going to get you to where you want to go? And they're like, oh, people, networking is a dirty word. Look, it's not a dirty word, right? I'm friends with Carol, and we build each other. And I say, Carol, I'm looking for this. Like, is that something you do? You know somebody? She's like, oh my God, right? You have got to meet this person over here. Yep. And because I'm meeting this way instead of meeting this way, it's a guaranteed win. It's when people know, like, and trust you, and you get meetings with their peers instead of trying to apply for things. That's where all the doors open up. There's not even doors in most of those things.
Really, it comes down to who you know. That networking is extremely important, and people don't understand it. I'm really sorry, guys. I'm still struggling with recovering from a cold. So
you're fine. And I harp on this all the time. I talk about this book all the time, and people look at me like I'm crazy, but it's so true. So there's 2 ways that you can explain networking, and Ken Coleman does it in a very fancy way in his book called The Proximity Principle. But to boil it down to make it boilerplate, it's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? If you want a job in a certain career field, then you need to know somebody that's at least 6 people removed from the person that you're trying to get to. And so the LinkedIn tactic that I tell people is, all right, every week connect to 1 to 3 people. Somebody that you used to work for, somebody that used to work for you, and somebody in the industry that you're trying to enter. And so if you can connect to one of those 3 people every week for a year, that's 52 new connections. And I can assure you that those 52 new connections are probably going to spiral 3 or 4x just based off of people saying, oh, hey, that guy's in his network. Let me connect to him. Hey, let me get to know you. Like, the reason why I am on this call right now is because somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn and was like, you really need to meet Travis. He's doing a lot of podcast stuff. You're doing podcast stuff. You guys should talk. And here we are, 6 months later, talking about how we got to this point. Mm-hmm. And it literally is the power of your network. So if you're not willing to, I don't like networking, because it's like, look, okay, if you don't like networking, hire somebody to do it. I'll do it for you. $15 a month.
Well, they don't like what networking that they've seen is. And what they've seen is people walk around and hand out a bunch of stupid cards that no one ever reads, right? They don't, they go in there and they just talk about themselves, or they talk about only their business, and they don't talk about, you'll have to write this down, those listening. They're not talking about the people or the person. If I'm in the networking and I'm meeting someone new, it's like, hey, tell me about like how you spend your weekends. Like, what do you do? Like, what do you do for fun on the weekends?
Get to know the person, build a connection, like a real one-to-one connection, and not I'm pitching you about my business, and now you can pitch me about yours. That's just an exchange. That's nothing.
It's
gross. You're not going to know that individual. Do I trust you? Probably not, because you're handing me a goddamn business card, right?
Yeah. I got to shower after those kind of meetings, right? Like, I feel dirty, right now I'm developing a relationship with somebody, and this person, the way they operate, what they do, where they're at in business, far above me. I've seen them once online and twice now in person. And I've only got to know them, asked them what they need, delivered what they need. I don't even know if they do know what I do for a living, because if it's about me, it's never going to work.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hardest things that everybody has to kind of get over is the selfishness aspect of it. Because yeah, you want to be successful. There's nobody that doesn't want to be. Like if you start a business or go into business, you're like, hey, I want to start this business and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and lose my shirt. No, nobody wants to do that. But from a perspective of development, like, yeah, there comes a point, like I've had somebody say it in a business meeting, like, hey, you might not like that guy, fucking shut up and have him help you solve the problem. Whoa. Yeah. Like that's brutally honest, but it's the truth. Cause sometimes there's going to be people that you can't get along with, that you have to work with, or folks that you have to work with that just aren't the right types of folks for you. And that's okay if it's initially, right? But once you kind of get your legs underneath you and get your company established, then you're like, I'm not going to deal with that person because I don't have to. You know, and I think that's one of the difficulties that a lot of small business folks see. And I don't know, you know, if their target audience is geared more towards those folks or for people that are in larger corporations or whatever, it doesn't matter. But there comes a point where, you know, you can only accept so much before you have to move on. And then when you move on, make sure that, you know, everything's amicable, because you don't have to, you know, I don't have to be
you don't have to end things in a bad way, of course.
Yes,
you know
exactly.
I mean? At the end of the day, it's just, I believe people come in your life for a season or a reason, right? And I truly believe it. I don't believe the people that I meet are accidental. I mean, I believe they were put in my path for a reason, you know, and so maybe it's a season. Maybe I have something to learn from them, right? Maybe they're around for a lifetime. We don't know, right? It would just, you got to walk the path with them. And some people, I mean, I have a best friend I've had since I was 15 years old. Now, he saw me through, you know, a marriage, several relationships, you know, having 2 kids, all of that. And that person has my back. He's my brother, literally a brother that, you know, just became a part of my family because he's been there through the tough times and through the good times. You know, those are the people you want to surround yourself with. Now, there's going to be some lessons to be learned where you learn it and then they have nothing else to contribute because you didn't connect any further in your relationship. So then you can end it amicably and just part ways and still stay connected, but they're not going to be part of your inner circle. So you're going to cycle through people throughout your lifetime, depending on where you are in your growth.
Yeah, I think there's that inherent fear of that the isolation, though. I think there's a lot of people, you know, at least in the veteran community that I see, that are afraid to kind of be like, oh, well, I don't know what this person is doing in my life anymore, but I'm going to keep them around just so I'm not alone, you know? And I think that's one of the
reason.
Yeah, but it happens more than you think. And I think that's one of the difficulties, particularly, yeah, service is great. So spending 20 years in the military is an awesome thing, but it also completely undercuts a lot of parts of you that you don't know. You've given up your youth to the US government, usually part of your health or vast majority of your health, and relationships, right? Because there's some relationships that you had to abandon from like high school or college that just would not work with your service. And then there's relationships that you have that you really don't want when you leave, but some of those are actually necessary to continue on to do what you need to do. Because I've seen so many people struggle with like, what's my identity after I hang the uniform up? And that's hard to do. Like I tell people all the time, like, yes, am I the guy that runs around with like a veteran baseball hat on sometimes or jacket or whatever? Sometimes. But the reality of it is you can tell that I was in the military based off the way that I talk, the way that I address people, the way that I treat folks. So that's not going to go away. And there's some people that try and bury that part of who they are. It's like, why? That's who you were. That's
you. I mean, yeah. Denying that is denying yourself.
Yeah. I tell people all the time, like, I'm going to be in a wheelchair before I stop being a soldier, right? Because I spent 47 years around the uniform, and guess what? I'm right outside of Fort Bragg, so I'm close enough to see the helicopters and airplanes fly over, but I'm far enough away that when that alert comes in that like at 2:00 in the morning, it's like, hey, we're shipping out, I don't have to get up, you know? So that's the best benefit of it. But I'm still close enough to help. And it's finding purpose after your service, where I think that's the difference between, somebody that grew up and turned into a corporate person versus somebody that grew up in the military and that is now trying to become that corporate person, is because the military is a Fortune 100 company. Like, nobody will ever admit that. We won't talk about that openly. But when you look at the amount of budget money that gets dumped into the government, hey, it's a Fortune 100 company. I would say it's probably a Fortune 5. If you look at the Department of Defense as a whole, $460 billion. I don't know very many companies that are managing that kind of cash, to be honest.
That kind of cash, that kind of people, that kind of impact, that kind of supply chain, that kind of humanitarian effort.
Yeah. So when you look at, the DOD as a whole, like, we don't do a good job at educating our leaders at saying, like, hey man, like, look, you have a whole bunch of corporate skills. Like, if you can manage a budget, you can do that, whether that be in the uniform or out of the uniform. But is that something that you choose to do? I had a call with one of my old NCOs this week, and he's like, yeah, man, I'm interviewing for this DOD job.
NCO.
Yep. Non-commissioned officer.
Non-commissioned officer. Okay.
Yeah. So he calls me up and he goes, yeah, man, I'm interviewing for this job on post. It's not really what I wanted, but it kind of fits into my skill set. So it's like, okay, man, like, you got to decide, is it worth your time and money? And he's like, well, it's going to let me see my kids more often. I have a more flexible schedule. There's things that I can do that allow me to spend more time with family. Well, guess what? The Army is not going to let you do that. Right. So there's enough missed birthdays. And like, literally, my wife and I were newlyweds for the first 5 years of our marriage because I was out of the house for 3 years of them, and so by having those things happen, like, it's now time to contribute back to your community, to your family, to your church, to whatever social organization or group that you belong to. I don't care, but at the end of the day, you have to contribute back. And so giving of yourself is the easiest way to do it. And it's hard to do because in the military, we teach you to be selfish. Hey, this is my assignment. I'm going to my next job. I've got to get my OER. I've got to get this good evaluation. I've got to get all these things. And so you're constantly in that pursuit of the I. And then all of a sudden that stops, that escalator ends and you're on the end of the road going, oh crap, like, what am I supposed to do now?
Right.
And so it makes it difficult for some people to transition. Others, I've seen people land like super, super easy. And it's like, those people have charmed lives and they are not me. But I think there's a lot of parts and pieces of just, making it through service and serving and jaded perspective. And that's one of the things I always talk about is, like, as a former military person, you have a jaded perspective, because 98% of the people that you serve with, when they wake up in the morning, they're trying to do the best job that they can. And then there's 2% that's just evil that we try and kick out anyway. But
well, that's true in every organization, mind you. Okay. It's not just the military. I mean, even in relationships, friendships, networking organizations, businesses, companies, all of that. Very true.
Yeah. And I think really for me, I always use the bell curve as an example. Like, if I'm underneath the bell curve, cool, we can operate. If you're outside of the bell curve, then we probably have some work to do. But for the most part, it's just like, again, for relationships, like, hey, look, I want to be on the higher end of that percentile. I want to be in the 70 or 80th percentile if I can underneath that bell curve. But then if they're outside of that bell curve, because we've all met those people like, wow, like, you are way too smart to be doing this job or managing this facility or doing whatever that is. Cause like, this person just
don't know the reasons why they're doing it too. There could be a reason that these overqualified people are doing that job, and it satisfies a need. I mean, it's based on a need they have. They don't have to explain it to everybody. And meanwhile, everybody's going, man, you do not belong here.
Again, and usually, like, if we use, again, going back to the head heart thing, right? So most people, wisdom wise, would be like, well, why are you doing this? But if it's fitting that need right there, who cares? Yeah. And I think ultimately that's what it boils down to, is just, find your tribe, find people that will support you, and then do that. Like, I can't stress that enough. It took some of my friends running into some brick walls going, ooh, hey man, like, I haven't heard from this guy in, 4 or 5 months. And then he calls me, and 90 days later, he goes, hey bro, I was in jail. Like, what? Like, why were you in jail? Stupid little thing that happened, right? It was just a minor disagreement that turned into full up incarceration for months. And then turns out, fast forward to today, hey, I got to make sure I'm on the right medication. I'm making sure that I'm doing all the right things for my health. And then the underlying issue wasn't, the dust up between him and the police officer. The underlying issue was undiagnosed medical stuff that had been going on for years that he never checked out. Why? Because in the military, what do? I just freaking hunker down. I bite down on my mouthpiece and turn into the fight. Like, that's what I do. That's who we are, is we're programmed to just blunt force trauma our way through bad situations. And sometimes it literally is like, dude, go sit down, talk to a counselor, get the right prescription, and change your life in that one minor tweak that's going to flourish afterwards.
But that's scary, because that means being introspective and really delving into the root problem, which is, for many, first of all, they're not sure exactly what it is. They just know it's big and scary, and they don't want to uncover it, because that's the little monster that they have to tame. And I can only imagine from, hearing from the military and from people that have discussed their service in the military. It's, I can't imagine what you've seen or experienced. I just know that that's stuff that you guys can never forget. So to uncover it, I can only imagine how emotional that is for these individuals. So if they can get, help and get through that, I mean, it'll make their lives so much easier and better, so that they can actually be a productive member of society. And what sucks is there's not, I don't know, is there a lack of resources for that?
It's really finding the right resource, right?
Yeah.
Cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy works for a lot of people. That shit don't work for everybody. EMDR, it's like eye movement, something or other, like that works for people, and some people it doesn't work for. It's actually the top thing the VA recommends, but they also don't promote that they do it. Some people need to get on plant medicine or ayahuasca or marijuana, or there's all these other options, but really there's no way to really be sure what it is you need until you try all this stuff. So someone that's been going to therapy for 10 years and it has done nothing, you say, well, just try one more visit, and you're like, it doesn't work for me. Like, why would I go? What, unless you really figure out how to dive deep down into that trauma. I went to therapy for years, for decades, trying to discover different stuff. And because of the rules of the therapist in that community, they couldn't ever get uncovered because they couldn't tell me the thing that they needed to tell me. But I did a program through Janet Hogan, who we know. I went through her program. I found out in 4 days what my problem was, because it was the right way, of the right approach for me. Right. I'm sure there's still some other stuff out there. I'm sure there's something else I can try. I'm sure it's not all solved, but I had to find the right methodology for me. And that wears people out. Going through all that stuff, setting up appointments, is your insurance cover it? Well, you've got out-of-pocket costs. I know this is what I need, but I can't afford. Oh my goodness. It's like, there's so much to deal with. It's not like you can just go to Walmart and be like, oh, mental health boost, pull it off the shelf.
Right.
I got it. I'm good now.
We live in an instant society where you pop a pill and solves a problem, right? And it's so much deeper than that, because it's the culmination of your experiences in life. You can't put that in a pill and expect it to go away and then your life is great. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Anything worth having is worth working for. Right. So like, if you want mental health, like, it's not going to be something that's going to be cured overnight, and you see it all the time, is people like, oh, well, if I just go do this, it's going to work out. Like, no, like, hey man, you can smoke all the weed you want. Yeah, it's probably going to deaden some nerve endings, kill some synapses. It's going to slow you down. You'll probably feel good for a while if you get the right stuff. But at the end of the day, you're not solving the problem. It may be available to treat a symptom, and that's okay. Right. All for it. Like, I know tons of folks that are in the, exploratory cannabis and CBD fields. Right. And the reason why they're doing that is because, hey, there's science behind it that says, hey, look, this is good for inflammation. It's good for anxiety. It's good for all this other stuff. Cool. Not what I would do. But again, as a person that wants to continue to learn, then I have to be like, okay, well, we're in this aperture of these medicinal, earth tones are going to help me or someone else that I may know. And it may not be the prescription for me, but it may be a prescription for someone else. And one of the things that, again, we have to shake off of the mental shackles of being in the military is like, oh, well, that guy's smoking weed. What a terrible human being. And it's like, well, no, that's probably what his doctor prescribed him because he's in one of those states that allow for medical marijuana. And again, that's a small mindset shift, but like, imagine living your life regimented for 20, 25 years. And then all of a sudden going, all this stuff that used to be like foreboding is now on the table. Well, why is it now on the table? Well, because the environment's changed, and it's something very simple, but it usually, it hurts a lot more people than you think, and they're like, oh, well, I don't want to take that stuff because people will look at me like I'm a druggie. Like, dude, like, you're not sitting on a street corner in torn up ass clothes, smelling like weed and booze. There's a marked difference between your friend going to smoke some CBD oil out of a vape canister versus, unfortunately, the homeless veteran that's on the street that has a substance abuse problem. There's two different categories of people. Guess what? Both of them probably need help, though.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't do it alone. I've retired more recently than Rob has, and I don't think it's fixed, but I definitely think it's going in the right direction. We're getting encouraged to go seek mental health options. We're getting encouraged to go take care of our medical stuff. And there's some people that are still of the old mindset that I can't go, like the place needs me. I'm like, they're going to go whether you're ready or not, right? They're going to grab someone else, throw them in the slot, and they're going to do what they need to do. If you are not good, if you're not good to go, whether it's in your head, whether it's emotionally, whether it's physically, whatever the thing is, are you going to go and cause a problem because you're not at 100%?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to go get in the way because you're having problems with your wife? Are you going to go get in the way, cause an airplane to crash because your finances aren't okay? Are you going to go get someone killed because you haven't been sleeping for the past 5 weeks?
Yeah.
So just because you want to go doesn't mean you should go.
Yeah. And that's a huge, like, there's so many different companies that I work with that are doing like AR and VR training for soldiers, like whether that be, trauma recovery, whether that be, sexual or military sexual trauma recovery, whatever it is, right? Like, there's all these different therapies and all these different things out here, but the common denominator is, a willingness to do it, right? And that's where 51% of soldiers get themselves in trouble, is because they're not willing to try. And so if you're not willing to try it, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, because it's like, oh, I don't want to do that. Because, like, so for example, maybe hypothetically, there's a company out there that has a device that monitors your heart rate, your sleep cycles, and your respirations. We hook this thing up to you, this device, and then it gives feedback to the commander, and the commander goes, oh, Rob hasn't slept in 2 days. Hey man, you're not mission ready. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Whoa. If I did that here at Fort Bragg, I could probably get away with it with like a conventional unit or a support unit. If I go down the road to the guys that have the highest of, national security missions and try and give it to that group of folks, they're like, ooh, no way, man. I don't want no artificial intelligence algorithm deciding on whether or not I can go on mission. So it goes back to Travis's point, is the access to that stuff and the willingness to use it. And willingness is just as dangerous as, the technology being available to do that stuff, because people, look, nobody wants to be fallible. I mean, that's the honest truth. Like, everybody puts out the biggest front. I'm Teflon. Nothing hurts me. Nothing bothers me, because I am, the manliest man on the planet, and my beard is longer than everyone else's. Like, that's kind of how this thing works.
Are we comparing beards now?
No, I'm just making a statement, but from the perspective of getting people to understand that, and particularly in certain communities in the military, it's getting better with the modernization, but it also is getting worse because we continue to inject society in on the military. The military should reflect society, but not so much to the point where it's detrimental to our ability to fight wars.
Yeah.
Like, I legitimately think, like, if the balloon were to go up tomorrow, like, Travis and I would not be on these calls very often. I'm sure that we would probably get recalled out of retirement status because of the current state of the military today. Right. And that's a problem.
So the current state of the military you're basically alluding to is what? That there's not enough experienced people in the military currently?
Let's say this. there's not very many able-bodied people that can come in. So when you look at the generation that's, you know, between 17 and 30 right now, those guys and gals are not volunteering for service. They're just not. And those that want to volunteer for service are not physically or mentally capable. So here's the thing about the military. You basically got two parties. You come in not physically fit enough, but you're mentally fit enough to serve in the military. And so we'll get you there. Or you're mentally fit enough, but not physically fit enough to get in. And then we fix you in your basic course or whatever. But either way, it's like you're either mentally prepared or mentally fit and you can go, or physically fit and not mentally there. Either way, the Army has a training program for that. Mm-hmm. But now we're getting to the point where it's both, right? Because again, you know, you go back and you look at the statement that everybody like thought Tom Cruise was a genius a couple of weeks ago when he was like, hey, look, you know what, all this medication for ADHD and all this other stuff, it doesn't work. You know, it's anecdotal. Like, he's a Scientologist. They don't believe in medicine anyway. But when, you know, Tom Cruise goes, hey, something's not right with this. And then everybody kind of recognizes, they're like, yeah, well, he was right. You know, we actually have scientific evidence to prove it. But guess what? We now have an entire generation of people that have been over medicated that now can't qualify for military service.
And not just over medicated, far over medicated, enough to where we're changing our genes and how we're able to even function.
Yeah. And so, and again, it's a hot button issue for me. It's just one of those things where it's like, look, honestly, I have nephews that are turning 18 this year. They have to register for selective service. If some shit pops off overseas, they're going to get drafted because there's not enough able-bodied people that want to serve in the military. And that's unfortunate. And it should never be that way. We should never in this country have to look anywhere to find anyone to do anything, because we are one of the greatest societies ever. Like, look at this call. Like, we have 3 different backgrounds on this call, you know, different nationalities, different personalities, different places in the country where we live and where we grew up. But guess what? We're all on this call together. Like, why? Because we can communicate openly about what's going on in our lives. Mm-hmm. And we have got to create community like that everywhere. So again, I say that all the time, building your tribe is so important, is because like it drives me crazy, because like I go to church on Sunday and I tell people in my church, it's like, look, I can go from 0 to 60 in about 30 seconds. And it takes a lot of willpower for me not to be the person that everybody in this church would be like, oh, don't talk to him because he's crazy, you know? And it's like, no, it's not that I'm crazy. It's just like, look, I've got, you know, 20 plus years of experience dirt napping bad guys for the US government. So my perspective on how people should interact is completely different. And if I throw that switch, that's going to be a game changer for a lot of people. Guess what? That goes for a whole bunch of people that I know. Right. I did an event a couple of weeks ago. My really good friend came out and we were hanging out with a whole bunch of former special operations dudes. And you know what the most commonly heard phrase is when you're hanging around a bunch of people that used to kill folks for a living? Oh, excuse me. Right. Excuse me. Sorry, man. Oh, I didn't bump into you. Didn't mean to. Excuse me. Like, why? Because at no point do we have to pecker check anyone. Right. Because we all know at some point we all went to the dance and did something. And so that's the difference. And so we have to get the rest of our community anymore. Yeah, like I don't have to show you how good I am. Like, hey, I may not be the best guy at shooting, but I can be the best guy at planning. And so by having a group of people like that kind of have mutual respect for everybody's skill set, again, it goes back to building your tribe. So if I build a tribe and everybody has the right roles and responsibilities, then life becomes easy. And part of the reason why we have so many struggles in our society today is because people can't find their niche. You know, well,
they're all trying to one up each other. So in that particular situation, everybody's elite. So there's no, hey, let's do a dick measuring contest and find out whose dick's bigger. It's like, no, everybody's got a big pecker here. We all agree on that, right? Cool.
Yeah. And it makes it so funny because like literally like some of the people that I've been hanging out with in retirement are like giants of the military, you know, former guys in special operations. And these guys are tremendous human beings and they're the nicest people in the world. Like, why? Because they probably killed more people than I shook hands with.
They understand who they are.
Secure people. Why can't we be confident, secure people instead of, what do you do? Because I have to be better than you. And it's just like, what the fuck is this all about?
I used to be that way when I was younger. When I was first in the military, I came from nothing, and I wanted to be the one. I was the one upper. Whatever story you told, I had a better story. And it wasn't until someone told me, like, "Hey, man, you're in. We like you. You don't have to lie to kick it with us." When I finally understood that, I got to let go of all those stories, because I don't have to have a fantastic story of whatever the thing is to be relevant, loved, accepted, part of the group. But it took me a while to learn that.
Acceptance is the key, right? All of us as human beings want acceptance. That's why people try so hard. That's why teenagers are always trying to fit in. Why not fit in?
You want to be accepted into a group, then you want to be shown praise for who you are as an individual.
Yeah.
And those things sometimes don't work in concurrence.
What?
Yes.
Right? You kidding me right now, Rob?
Well, and but that's part of it. It's just, it truly is an oxymoron, right? Like, hey, I want to be accepted for who I am, but I also want to be part of the group. And, and that's hard to do. The military does it okay, right? Because we throw you all in the same uniform. You march all in the same direction, and you do all those things. And there's probably some benefits when you look at countries that have mandatory service in, whether it be a civilian or military capacity. Those countries have a different attitude towards the population than we do in the United States. Because when you look at the numbers, less than 2% of the country has ever served at any given time. So when you look at that, 98% of Americans will never be touched by, combat or even law enforcement. I would bump that up to say between 3 and 5% of the country does law enforcement, teaching, firefighters, and military. And here's the sad part, right? The people that are responsible for health, welfare, and security of our communities and our nation have the lowest paychecks. And that's a problem. If we want to attract, younger, more talented people, right? It's not the messaging that we use. It's, hey, look, I'm going to pay you $100,000 for you to go overseas and not get shot. Right. We hope that you don't, but if you do, we're going to take care of you on the back end of that. And I think, the promise to veterans has been broken in many senses, in the fact that our society doesn't represent. And I'll leave you guys with this. This is kind of like the one of the heaviest comments that I've ever heard in many, many years. So right before I retired, so this was, in 2020, guys went overseas for the 75th anniversary of the Normandy invasion. And all these paratroopers are running around, their berets looking all cool. You got the guys in their vintage uniforms and everything else running around. But there's a couple of those old World War II veterans that were still, alive and kicking, running around. They're probably in their early mid 90s at that point. And one of my buddies is walking around, and, everybody's like, "Oh, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service." And then somebody said, "Thank you for your service" to this older paratrooper from the 101st. And he looks at him and he goes, "You were worth it." And you're like, holy shit, man. Like, how do I come back from that one? I can't, And so that's one of the things, like, as a veteran, or even as an American citizen, it's like, hey, be worth it for those guys who basically jumped on a boat, flew on a plane, landed in this foreign country, fought for 4.5 years. And I'm sorry, they did not come back. They didn't fight that war to protect the world so they could come back and have people shitting on them on TikTok, telling people that you're stupid. Oh, you joined the military because you're dumb. All the laundry list of things that our generation of soldiers got when they came back.
Yeah.
I mean, I had somebody ask me if I killed any babies while I was overseas, and I was like, yeah, only the ones I ate.
Oh my God.
And I was like, hey, I'm kind of hungry, and I started reaching for their kid,
but oh my God, you're a monster. How could you possibly? How could you possibly make such a stupid statement?
But that's part of it too, is like, look, it Rudyard Kipling said it, that, there's always got to be rough men that are willing to go fight for the cause, and I completely butchered the quote, but I know, what I'm talking about. It's like, hey, look, there's always got to be somebody that's going to stand point on that. And whether that be standpoint in an industry that, not normally has folks like that, like you can use, there's thousands of examples. You're an NFL fan, like look at all the black quarterbacks in the NFL, right? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what were we talking about? Oh, black quarterbacks will never be successful in the NFL. Well, shit, man. I'm looking at freaking, you know, a whole bunch of those guys that are crushing it. And guess what? Nobody's saying, oh, it's because he's black. It's like, no, like Patrick Mahomes is super, super skilled. You know what I mean? Like we're looking at Lamar Jackson and everybody's like, oh, that guy's super, super skilled. Doesn't matter the color of his skin, but what those guys could do to help us to break the freaking stereotype is stop running around with fucking dreadlocks talking like you got marbles in your fucking mouth. Right?
I was trying to think of the 90s. You had like Randall Cunningham. I don't remember when Michael Vick started, but then you had the guy, who was his name?
Warren Moon. Yeah,
he ended up playing for the Vikings too. Like you had a couple of guys and that was it, 2 or 3 at any one point. And now you've got people out there killing it.
Yeah. And so you look at the paradigm shifting, but in the same breath, what happens? You have a black quarterback, and I'm going to get political for just a second. You have a black quarterback that is kneeling for police brutality. You know, oh, I'm calling Kaepernick, I'm going to take the knee because police brutality. Hey, motherfucker, your parents were white. Right? So how can you talk about racial inequality and white privilege when your parents were white, dude? Like you were adopted. So if there was systemic racism in the country that wouldn't allow black people to get advantage, you never would have been adopted by a white family.
Exactly.
You know, and that's one of the hardest things for me is to not like just call out bold-faced hypocrisy on the face. And I think as human beings, we're hardwired to spot it, but we're not hardwired to call it out.
People are afraid of standing out to call those things out, though. And it requires people having courage.
Yeah.
I think it's just find your voice, and again, build your tribe.
Yeah.
Do you know why Colin Kaepernick kneeled?
No, he couldn't tell me.
So initially he sat for the national anthem, one game. And I want to say it was a Green Beret that told him that kneeling was more honorable. I don't agree or disagree with you. I don't personally give a shit, but kneeling was more honorable as a way to say that he still respected people, but also would do a protest. And I found it interesting because a lot of guys in the military got mad. I didn't personally care. I didn't feel like it was disrespectful because I can't think of another time that kneeling has been disrespectful. You kneel to get knighted. You kneel to propose. You kneel to pray. So I don't understand why kneeling was a big deal personally. But
I don't think it was.
Sure got a lot of people riled up.
Oh, I look at it this way. I don't think it was the kneel. I think it was the intention. Right. And so I think intentionality has a lot to do with it. So for example, like if I put a picture of Tim Tebow and Colin Kaepernick next to each other kneeling, which one of these guys is right?
It depends on which side of the spectrum you are and which one you hate.
Correct.
You know?
But if you're an honest person, you're like, well, I never thought of it that way, because he's doing it and that's considered honoring, and that guy's doing it and it's considered the worst thing known to man.
What about rioting, right? We had the January 6th, right, that people have a problem with. There was riots all over the country before that one side was promoting. And then when it got to the Capitol, then the other side promoted it. Right. It's all rioting.
It's all about context, right? Well, it's political. They're disgruntled, right? They're disgruntled. Like it's disgruntled when it's in favor of a political stance that I have. And that's the reason why, our country has to take a step back and look at the 30,000 foot view. Here's what I know. There wouldn't be tens of thousands of people trying to cross the border or immigrate to America every year if it wasn't a great place. Like if it sucks so bad, like people would not be coming here. Like that's just common sense.
Jumping ship.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if we legitimately thought that America was this cesspool, that the way that people talk about it sometimes, like then why are you here? Guess what? I haven't seen any of those mofos move to Canada.
Yeah, right. Exactly. By the way, I have my family and we visited them in Taiwan before the whole pandemic, and they were laughing about the presidency. They were like, you guys realize, and they were very opinionated about who should be president. And I was like, okay, why do you feel that way? And they were telling me, I'm like, have you ever thought that maybe your news source is skewed? Like you're being given a perspective that's not really true. So I sat there and talked to him about it. I'm like, I really believe that whatever is going on is because you're being fed this perspective, like this person's an evil person. And I go, really, you should be doing some research to find out for yourself before you speak.
Yeah.
But I can't research my own stuff. I only got to listen to one person tell me everything.
The key to winning a debate is not raising your voice. It's attacking the other person's point of view with facts, right? There's a reason. There's a reason why, a lot of the new media sources that are out there, when you look at the Ben Shapiro's and the David Crowder's, I think it's David Crowder. I can't remember. Steven Crowder. Yeah. So when you look at Steven Crowder and guys like that, the reason why those guys are influencing people in the way that they are is because they show their receipts, right? So they don't say sources say. Well, what are your sources? Well, go to my website and pull down the laundry list of sources that I cited. And you would think that people that have lived and grown up in these academic institutions where plagiarism is verboten, right, that they would show their work. Because if I write a paper in a U.S. history class and I blatantly plagiarize somebody else's work and I don't cite it, guess what? I'm going to fail that class. So as a consumer of information, if they cannot cite their sources, regardless of where it comes from, then they're probably not being truthful. At the very least, they're plagiarizing an idea. At the very most, they're lying to you.
And they're cherry picking.
They're probably being opinionated more than even putting out facts. You know what? We live in the age of Google. You can Google fucking everything. If you want to do your research, ask the question on Google. You'll get a fucking answer.
Yeah. You carry access to the Library of Congress in your pocket.
Yeah.
There's no reason.
I'm a Christian, and there's a lot of people angry at Christians right now. And the ones that are angry at are the ones that forgot there was a New Testament written. That's all about love, grace, forgiveness. They forget there was a New Testament.
Yeah, it's all edgy now. Everything's extremely negative, extremely edgy. What about going to our softer side? What about just treating everybody with love? If it comes from a place of love and good intentions, you should have no problem. But people are so negative and they immediately shoot people down. And it's just this, I don't know. I don't even get on social media anymore because everybody is opinionated. Everybody is a negative perspective. Me? Yeah. That's fucking poison to me because I'm a positive person. I don't need that shit in my life.
What I tell people all the time is, what the problem with religion is? People. It's not the religion. No, seriously, when you sit down and you look at every major religion of the world, it says, be a good person and good things will happen to you. Be nice to your neighbors. Treat people with respect and decency. Every religion says that. What perverts it is this, right? The head's there. You can read all the script that you want, but the intention of our heart is what makes it bad. So if you're going to be a charitable person, you don't have to be, I don't have to be Tony Robbins in a mega church to give money away to somebody that's starving. You know what I mean? I don't have to be Franklin Graham in Samaritan's Purse. I just have to say, that person's starving. I see this guy standing on a street corner. I'm going to hit the drive-thru at Burger King and buy this guy lunch. That's a simple thing that you can do. Don't have to preach at them. Don't have to share a religious message. Nothing. It'll make you feel good about yourself, but guess what? It's going to make that guy feel even better because he probably hasn't eaten in 2 days. And those are things that we can all do as part of a community. And, some days there's days where I just unplug. It's I'm not even going to rise to the bait, because that's 90% of our existence today is just batting ideas back and forth and trying to find people that are going to support your idea. Rather than going back to we talked about this an hour ago, having somebody that's going to give you honest feedback and be hey, that's not right. Yeah. Or have you considered this?
What you've always said, find your tribe. Those people, right? Those people are the ones that are going to help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah. And the folks like that, and the cool part about having good people in your tribe is they're going to give you that feedback and no, dummy, you're missing target here. Right. And that's helpful because
it absolutely is. If people wanted to add you to their tribe, Rob, where would they find you?
I am everywhere, but more than likely the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I use that quite often and I can send you all my information. I think you have it, but that, or you can find me on, and here's time for the shameless plug. So if you don't like that part of the show, cut it off now. But
no, stay for the ads.
Go.
Yeah, we got to pay some bills. But so Yeah, you can find me anytime on at asforfootball.com. So we do 2 college football shows. We do an Army football podcast. It's basically geared towards West Point graduates and people that are just fans of Army football. We do college football roundtable, which is basically us waxing philosophical about what's going on in college football. We may or may not talk about some betting lines and what games we're watching, and maybe that we would lay money on them if our state would allow us to. But we talk about stuff like that. And then one of the other things that I do, and it's something that I'm passionate about, and this is really how I got linked up with Travis, is I do a podcast called Philosophy from the Front Line. And so basically what I do is I take my experience in transition, which I thought I was super, super lucky and blessed to have everything that happened to me happen, because it's put me in the position where I am today. And I try and take stories from different veterans of all different walks of life and background, and then tell people their transition story. So maybe they can gain a nugget of wisdom, whether that be a book that they read, a situation that they were put in, or something to that effect. Because at the end of the day, your transition story is as unique to you as your DNA is. So I can't take the same lesson that I learned and say, oh, Travis, you should just do this, because it's not going to work for him. Like, why? Because he's in a completely different place than I was when I transitioned from the Army. But there's probably somebody that's similar enough to Travis's situation or my situation that they can benefit from it. And again, the last question that I always ask everybody is, what is a good book that you read that helped you transition? And so that part of it is like, oh, here's the book, go find it, look it up, and do some reading. Again, do your own research. Again, that's why I encourage people to do, is listen to the stories, do your own research, and then come up with who you want to be.
So you wanted people to miss that part of the interview where you gave them all that great details and logic about their future? I don't get you, Rob. But if you want to hear me talk on Rob's show, I've been a guest, and you can go check out what I had to say about my transition story and philosophy from the front lines. Carol, you have anything else you want to add to this before we log off?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Rob.
No, I try my best. And again, I think it always helps to have good company and having, people that you can commiserate with and genuinely talk and be open. And I think that's one of the biggest failings of our communities today, is like, we just can't walk over to our neighbor's house and say, hey man, what's going on in your life? Because either that's considered too intrusive, or it's like, oh, I got this nosy ass neighbor that keeps coming over and asking me how I'm doing. Like, you figured that would be okay, but it's 2022 and times have changed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being our guest today. We'll catch you next week.
That's all for this episode of Titan Evolution Podcast. We hope this no-holds-barred conversation opened your eyes on what it takes to live a genuinely happy life according to your own terms. Now that you've treated yourself to such a refreshing discussion, you cannot listen to nonsense content anymore. Be sure not to miss an episode by subscribing to the show at TitanEvolutionPodcast.com. Don't forget to share the word so more people can be enlightened, informed, and entertained. Thank you for listening.